Hello, I'm Dr. Brennan Roach, and welcome to a virtual tour of the Holy Land. And today we are going to be going and visiting a place called Caesarea Philippi, the place of the source. In season 2, we are going to go to the most furthest northern parts of Israel, and we're going to work our way back down through Galilee and back down eventually to the Sea of Galilee as we get there towards the end. We're going to visit important Old Testament sites, New Testament sites where Jesus went. We're going to visit places of battles and gods and legends and parables and myths and lots of amazing things, particularly a lot of those fantastic Old Testament stories. So we're going to be going and having a look at those places. So be with us as we enjoy and as we start and commence season 2 of a virtual tour of the Holy Land. The oldest version of the Bible had a little palace where he could stop overnight. Whoever interprets the dream has incredible power. If you're going from Jerusalem to Jericho or vice versa, you stop somewhere here and rest overnight. Near the caves where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found. This is actually a pagan type place. It's a very likely place where Peter preached his first sermon. Some very significant, important events happen at this location. Hi, I'm Dr. Brennan Roach, and this is a virtual tour of the Holy Land. And today we are going to visit the city of Caesarea Philippi, otherwise known as Banyas, or the Roman city of Panias. So we'll talk and we'll have a bit of a look at that. Caesarea Philippi is a Roman name of the city named after Caesar. So if you go around the Roman Empire period and to different cities and states and countries and places, you'll see a lot of places called Caesarea. Even in fact, this one, Caesarea Philippi, and down on the coast, we have another town called Caesarea, which we're going to have a look at another time when we go through our virtual tour of the Holy Land. In Caesarea Philippi, there is a cave or a grotto from which a strong, steady stream flows, and it's one of the beginning points of the River Jordan. Just a little bit down the road, and in a few episodes' time, we're going to have a look at a place called Tel Dan. And Tel Dan is a place where there's several little tributaries and streams that start to create the beginnings of the Jordan River. So today we're going to have a look at Caesarea Philippi, the place of the source. So where are we? Let's have a look and we will see where we are. If we go back to our biblical map, we can see on our map, and we go right to the top of the map, we can see there's Caesarea Philippi right at the beginning point of the Jordan River. So that's where we are. We can see the Sea of Galilee. We can see the Jordan River. We can see Jerusalem down there in the south. We spent a lot of time around the Dead Sea, Jericho, Mount Nebo, around the areas of Jerusalem in our last season. And this year we're going to be going north, and we're going to be spending our time going to the very northern boundaries of the biblical boundaries of Old Testament and New Testament times, also the modern boundary of where Israel meets Lebanon. And literally, you can just go a very, very short distance, a matter of kilometers. You can see Lebanon from in here as we are at Caesarea Philippi. It's a beautiful garden place, which also is right near Tel Dan. So it was the northern boundary of the tribe of Dan, and it also was in the New Testament times. But in New Testament times, it was a Jewish city. Sorry, it was a Roman city. It was not a Jewish city. It was incorporated by the Romans. It was run by the Romans. So there were very, very few Jewish inhabitants. So let's have a look at some images and some pictures of Caesarea Philippi that we actually see here, and you can see there that it's very nice. It's sort of, you can see the water flowing out And you can see it's a sort of very lush area. And if you know Israel, it's a desert region, most of the country, and it's in the wilderness is down south. But up here in the north, it's a little bit more fertile. There's a little bit more water flowing around. And particularly we see the very, very, very beginnings of the Jordan River, literally the first couple of 100 meters of the Jordan River. And we go a little bit further in and we can see the steps, see little steps and waterfalls. Now that's not natural. That's just a modern day engineering to try and keep the water in the grottos so that we who are coming and visiting and having a look can have a little bit more of an idea. But it creates a beautiful little waterfall effect, and you can see the plants and around there. As we get a little bit closer, you can see the grotto. Have a look in the middle there. You can see a little cave, or a grotto as it's called, and that's where the water is actually flowing out from, and it's a fairly substantial amount of water. When we have a look at the actual, now this is looking from the side view, a little bit of an elevated view on a great place to have a little bit of an overview. And you can see here, you can see we've got arches, we've got steps, all we have here is the remains of what was several temples. So it was just the base of the foundation. And across the wall here on our left-hand side, we can see some niches where some gods and some statues of the various temples would have been found. And finally there, we have a close-up and you can see that lovely green water. It's just unfortunate there's just not a lot of water flowing out of it anymore. But in biblical times, there would have been huge amounts of water. And in biblical times, they didn't know that there was a bottom to this. They couldn't actually find the bottom of the water flowing out of the rock. And we'll talk a little bit about the water flowing out of the rock and how miraculous that is. But we are right at the base of Mount Hermon. So as the snow falls on the top of Mount Hermon and it gets warmer and it melts, not all of it actually just flows down the rock. It flows into the crevices of the rock and makes itself come out in this place in actually quite an amazing underground river that pops up here at the base of Mount Hermon, which is actually Caesarea Philippi. Now, to help you a little bit, I've cobbled together a couple of clips, video clips of some people who travel, just to give you a little bit of a sense. So let's go to the video right now and have a look and see how that goes for us. So this is sort of taking us on that view on here of Mount Hermon. Sorry, let's go back to the start. It wasn't quite at the start. There you go. So here we are. We're walking up the path that comes up, and you can see another view of these pools with the steps and the vegetation that's there. So just see those barriers. Imagine them being removed and just a very strong river flowing down through here. But there's been a lot of climate change and it's quite a dry area now, but the water's still flowing out. Here's a great view again from the top, looking down, and you can see the temple area. You can see the grotto, and I love this little thing that I found, so I thought I'll pop it in for you. You got to love this. Have a look at this. You've got Pan. Who's that dude popping up? So it's a little animation of the god Pan. And the reason why this is called Panias or Bunyas is actually after the Roman god Pan. And that's I just thought it was funny. Little depiction of Pan there, and he's half man and half goat. And you can see, if you have a look very closely, you can see the horns and you can see the legs that are more like a goat's legs than that of an actual human being. So that represents the god Pan. Of course, you know Pan as the Greek and Roman god who plays the flute. So it's called the Grotto of Pan. That's actually a nice view from the top there. And let's go back to our slides and we can actually see what we're here. So it's actually a nice, beautiful little spot. It's not very big in a modern context, but it was actually an incredibly big city during the time of Jesus. So this city was a very powerful, active city. I mean, the water was flowing. It was incredibly important over the period of time. It was part of the tribe of Dan. And then when the Romans come in, because the Romans love water, they love an aqueduct, they love hot water springs, which is also found in the region. So they really bought into this as being a place of the gods. But we're going to focus on the time of Jesus around 30 AD and those very famous words that Jesus spoke, "Who do you say that I am?" So let's have a look at Caesarea Philippi. This is a couple of renditions of artist impressions, which are very nice. I like them. They're quite good. So let's have a look at them, and you can see all the red roofs. You can have a look. If you look across to the left, you can see it's a walled city. And it's quite a large city, quite a large complex of temples and cities and amphitheaters and theaters, all the luxury things that would be in a very wealthy Roman city. And that's because this was a very wealthy Roman city. It was a large city that spread out across, and it was incredibly wealthy due to the temples that we found in this location. So let's have a look at those temples. Let's have a bit of a look at the sanctuary, or the temples of Pan, as they're called, or the temple complex. So here's a nice another artist impression. Of course, they're all artist impressions because there's only the foundations that are left on this site going down to the bedrock. But we're able to know from the bedrock and from other installations found, this is what the temples were, and we actually know the names of the temples, and that's all fairly reliable. And so the temple complex. So Caesarea was essentially a Roman city in the time of Jesus. It was a place of great wealth for the Romans and the temple priests. So all of these temples here had their own priests, and people would come and offer sacrifices, and the priests became incredibly wealthy. And Rome saw these temples as being very, very important. And so they actually created a fortified city, and they protected the temples, they protected the wealth. They even had soldiers based here, quite a significant amount of soldiers. So it was quite unusual. It was nothing else like this in all of Israel in the time of Jesus. So Jesus goes up to this. I mean, they had different bits and pieces, but this was an entire city controlled by Rome, which you would have seen in any other part of the Roman world that was a powerful city. So that's important, and that's a really good thing for us to know, and that's a really good thing for us to understand. So here we have all the different temples, and we're going to move through, and we're going to a slightly different look at them. This is a different artist impression, but a way I like the way this person's put them together. It makes it really clear for us what's going on. So on the first slide here, we see the Temple of Augustus. And the Temple of Augustus was really important because it was literally a temple to a Caesar who had died, and they'd made into a god. Now let's think about this. If we think about the Temple of Augustus, this is the government in control declaring themselves to be God. And the other interesting thing that we can see about this temple is it's right over the grotto. It's right over the cave. And so the river is literally flowing out from underneath the temple. Amazing engineering feat. But what that says more importantly is, we are Rome. We control all sources of wealth and power. We are greater than the gods. So let's have a look as to what the other temples were. We've got the court of Pan and the nymphs, which we can see right next. Now Pan, as I said, was a god of like fertility, and he had his nymphs who would help him. And between the Pan and the nymphs, they basically controlled agriculture. Now, when you think about the ancient world, you think about water. Water creates crops. Crops creates food. Food can then be for livestock of animals, and that's how the wealth is created. When there was drought, where there was famine, and the wealth dissipated. But for an agricultural area like this, they didn't have gold and silver mines and different things like that. What they had was agriculture. And people were able to, in the ancient world, would get very wealthy and very rich off agriculture. And of course, Pan the nymphs were critical to this. So that's why this is around wealth. It's around prosperity. That's why people give a lot of money, because they want to worship those gods and become wealthy themselves. So let's have a look at the next slide. And the next one is the Temple of Zeus. And that's the biggest of the temples. It was in the middle. And of course, we know Zeus is the main god of the pantheon of the gods. So he's the one in charge, the sky, the weather, if you're going to be king or not, the fate of the world was all revolving around Zeus, and he controlled, and he was a leader of all the gods, the father of the gods. So that was why he was the biggest and he was the most important. The next one was the court of Nemesis. Have you heard of that saying, he or she is my nemesis? Well, the idea is that that person is sort of like your enemy, but your nemesis was someone who had this incredible favor, good luck, whatever you want to call it, and it's completely undeserved. That's the idea of it. So it would be, this will where you go basically to worship a god, for it to have that undeserved favor pour out upon you, or for that undeserved favor to actually be removed from somebody else. So that's why it's called the court of Nemesis, and that's what the god Nemesis was actually about and referring to. Then you got the temple and the tomb of the sacred goats. You got to love a sacred goat. Well, of course, again, this is revolving around agriculture, revolving around the goats being symbolic of that agriculture and that wealth and that power and that influence. So Pan is someone who plays the flute, which is where we get the pan flute from. And he's also part goat, so that's agriculture. So it sort of links in a little bit with seduction and different things like that, but we're not going to get too much into that in our lesson here today. So the temple of Pan and the dancing goats, according to mythology, was half goat, the lower body, and half human, playing his pipe, and hence the dancing goats, because he was playing his pipe, so they would dance along in the temple. So that's where we have the background. That's where we have the setting of what's actually going on. So what actually happened here? All of you would have heard this story, and maybe some of you are already picked up on it. So this is the place, the famous place for Jesus saying, who do you say that I am? So who do you say that I am? This is when he's talking to Peter and the apostles, and he takes them with him. And we see this referenced in several places in the Bible. It's a very critical, important story. Matthew chapter 16, verses 13 and 16. Mark chapter 8, verses 27 and 29, which is going to be our focus of our teaching today. And Luke chapter 9, verses 18 to 20. So Jesus has taken his disciples, the miracles, healings, teaching, crowds. And so he then takes just the apostles or the disciples, the 12, away with him. And he starts to go up towards Caesarea Philippi. Now he goes to the place of the source of the Jordan River. So this is where the Jordan River begins. Remember, we talked about the Jordan River as a place of cleansing. When they crossed over the river, the baptism of John going into the promised land, the Jordan River was a place of cleansing. So if the Jordan River is the place of cleansing, what the source is important, right? Because if you're being cleansed, you need to understand who is the source, what's coming from God. So that's really important. So Jesus is coming up to this place, and it's surrounded by temples. And this is the place where Jesus decides that he is going to say, who do you say that I am? Now, I think there's a couple of reasons why, and a lot of people have debated and speculated about this, but I think there's a couple of reasons why Jesus comes to Caesarea Philippi. One, which is I think that the main thing is, who is the source of all blessing? And when we look at this, and when we see water coming out of the rock, and we look in the Old Testament in particular, whenever water is coming out of the ground or water is coming out of the rock, it is always a miracle provision of God. So this is where water is coming out of the rock, and Jesus is saying, who is the source of blessing? Now, these guys are going to be the apostles. They're going to be the leaders of the church, and they need to understand who the source of blessing is. And that is because of the second point, that Jesus wants to see and make sure that the most of the time throughout the whole of history, apart from Europe for a couple of centuries, the gospel has found itself in a completely hostile environment. Particularly for the first 300 years, the gospel was constantly in a hostile environment. Hostile with the synagogues, hostile with the Roman Empire, being chased and hunted and beaten, and all of that sort of thing. So those 2 points were critically important. One, who is the source of blessing? And two, Jesus had to see how they were going to handle that when preaching Jesus. Who is Jesus in hostile environments? Let's think about it for a moment. Why not Jerusalem? Why not Jerusalem? So you go to Jerusalem, you go, this is a temple, this is a place where the presence of God is in this time before Jesus had died. And so why not go and announce yourself and who you are at the temple? But maybe it's more important to Jesus that these guys know not how to do it in the presence of God, but in the presence of hostile enemies. Well, why not Nazareth? Why not in his hometown? Why not go when he goes and talks? This is, and he makes the announcement of who, and they chase him off. Why not do it there? But again, that's not the right place. Why not do it in Capernaum? For me, that sounds like a really logical place. It's his, for want of a better word, it's where his church is. It's where his place is. It's where he's well known. It's where he's well respected by Jew and Gentile alike. And we remember the stories of Matthew, the tax collector, and we remember the story of the centurion who comes for healing. And this is a place where just amazing miracles constantly happened, was in Capernaum. Why not do it in Capernaum, where the miraculous power of God is coming through? But no, Jesus chooses to do it in a hostile environment, a place surrounded by temples to foreign gods and guarded by Roman soldiers. So I think the source of blessing is incredibly important. And what we see, we have to ask ourselves, where does the blessing of God come from? So let's think about those temples in order. Let's think about the Temple of Augustus. So does my blessing come from the government? Now, if you're in Australia and many other Western parts of the world, do you get social security, get welfare? Do you get benefits? Do you get protection? Do you get police? Do you get teaching? Do you get education? Is the government maybe my source of blessing? Is the Temple of Augustus maybe my source of blessing? Or does my blessing come from one true God? And it is God who overrides the government, who oversees the government, who is more in control rather than the governments. So I think that's an important question. And I think that Jesus, I'm sure he had more discussions. Or does it come from Pan? Pan was a god of prosperity. Pan was a god of agriculture. Pan was a god that actually people would go and worship because they wanted money, they wanted wealth. Nothing has changed. People go and worship at the government for control, and people go and worship at the temple of business for money. And that's what Pan was about. He was about money. He was about receiving all of those things that you could only think could possibly come from God. Or does it come from the one true God? The Old Testament is full of miraculous stories where water comes out. Moses taps the rock and the water comes forth. He puts the rod of Aaron into the polluted water, and it becomes fresh and they can drink from it. You see, God is a source of blessing more powerful than all the other gods, all the other governments, all the other control features that we could see possibly. So who is the miracle worker? The one true God or the gods? So they have to get this right. You have to get this right. Who is in control? Who is your source of blessing? Is it the one true God, or is it the gods? And do you bounce around from one to another, seeing if you get blessing from this, blessing from that? Who are you controlled by? Who's important to you? But God can use all of those different things to bring blessing into our life when we need it. But who is the source of blessing? So I want you to answer one important question tonight that Jesus was asking of the apostles. Who is the source of blessing, even when we're suffering persecution? Let that settle in for just a sec. Even when we're suffering persecution. You see, we think and limit God's blessing to prosperity. We limit it to the car we drive, the house we live in, the job we've got, the career prospects, and all of that material thing. But that material thing is no more simply than going and worshiping at the Temple of Augustus, the Temple of Zeus, and the Temple of Pan, and you are dancing around like a silly goat chasing those things. So we want to understand, we want to acknowledge that God is the source of our blessing. The persecuted. So we see as they go through from this moment on, when they turn around, the persecution really lifts. So Jesus wanted to let them know, wanted them to know that they could be strong, that they could be in a Roman city with foreign gods, all the power and wealth that you can imagine in that place, yet God is in control. No matter what the circumstance, no matter what the situation, no matter how much they're persecuted. And we just have a look at what their circumstances and what happens to them over and over again in the book of Acts and in the letters. They're beaten, they're robbed, they're nowhere to sleep, they're shipwrecked. All of these different things, they're persecuted, they're beaten with rods, they're in prison. All of this. So Jesus needed to know, and they needed to know. More importantly, Jesus knew they needed to know for themselves that they could handle the persecution. That it's not about creating a warm, wonderful environment where it's just you and there's no persecution, but rather understand that God is in our heart. And then now, in that context, we get to some really interesting questions. I love this one. Who do people say that I am? Not who do you say that I am? Who do others say that I am? And I love this because Jesus asked them, who do people say that I am? And they say, well, John the Baptist and Elijah and one of the prophets. And gee, I reckon this is a pretty, this is a pretty incredible list of people that we actually have here. Who do you say that I am? Well, if you would say to me, you're John the Baptist, or you're Elijah, or you're one of the great prophets, I'd be going, happy with that, pretty good. If you want to compare me to those, but this is not a significant comparison for Jesus. He is not John the Baptist, no matter how great of the prophets John the Baptist is. He is not Elijah, who is prophesied to return and come back on the great and dreadful day of the Lord. He is not one of the other prophets. And this was in some of the intertestamental books like Second Esdras. We see that they were believing in the end days that Isaiah and Jeremiah would return. What they meant by that is the spirit of Isaiah and Jeremiah, the spirit of John the Baptist, not a literal interpretation. So they say, and they're talking about who do people say that I am? So it's important that you understand that these, even though we get in the world where people say, yeah, Jesus was a good man, Jesus was a great teacher, I follow the teachings of Jesus. That doesn't matter what great status you give to the person of Jesus. If the person of Jesus is not the Son of God, it doesn't matter. You are degrading, you are demoting, you are pushing down with compliments the greatness of actually who Jesus is. So then we've got in Mark 8:29, who do you say that I am? He said to them, but who do you say that I am? Now that use plural, it's not just Peter. This is not a question just for Peter. It's a question for everyone. It's a question for you and me, you, the plural, every one of us. Peter answered to him and said, you are the Christ. So the emphasis is on all of us. What had Jesus observed and learnt in there? What did they learn with their time with Jesus? Was Jesus just a miracle worker? There was plenty of miracle workers around at that time. There's plenty of people who could heal. There's plenty of people who could prophesy. There's plenty of people who even raised others from the dead. So what did they actually see? What were they actually responding to? And I love it's Peter. It's always Peter who's just bang out of the gate. First thing in his head, no filter, which is great because it actually, out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. So no filter, bang, out it comes. And we can see that Peter answered, you are the Christ. In Luke chapter 9, verse 20, it says the Messiah of God. In Matthew 16:16 says the Messiah, the Son of the living God. Now, these Gospels are all written to different groups of people. So it's in essence exactly the same thing. So in the Brenner Revised Version, it says, you are the Christ, the Messiah, the Son of the living God. You're all of them. You're all of those things. Whatever it means to you as a group of people to say that he is God, he is part of the Trinity, he is the one true God. Who do you say that I am? And this is not revealed except by the Spirit of God. I can't convince you. No one can convince you. This only comes through faith. This is a revelation that only comes because you have had an encounter with God. The Holy Spirit has spoken deep into your heart, and you know that he is the Christ, that he is the Messiah, that he is the Son of the living God. Who do you say that I am? This is all personal. So if Peter can't get to the day of Pentecost and go, someone else believes this. No, he believes that he's the Son of God, which is why he's up there speaking, which is why he is up there preaching. And then we move on to the Peter and the rock, and there's been a lot said about this, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but Peter's confession carries a huge amount of weight. And we as evangelicals or Pentecostals sometimes get a little bit wrapped up in the Catholic Church view that he's the first pope. Don't worry about that. Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Jesus replied, "You are blessed, Simon, son of John, because my Father in heaven has revealed this to you. You did not learn this from any human being. Now I say to you that you are Peter, which means the rock, and upon this rock I will build my church, and all the powers of hell will not conquer it. And I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you forbid on earth will be forbidden in heaven, and whatever you permit on earth will permit on heaven." I've actually been to the Vatican a few times. Vatican Museum, amazing place for biblical archaeology and history. Thank God they collected and kept all those things for us to be able to study and learn about. But one of the cute things they have is the keys. They have Peter and the popes. They have the keys, and that's the symbol of the Vatican, is the keys of the kingdom of heaven. So I quite like that. It's a literal interpretation of the keys there, which is quite nice. So, but the thing is, the thing I like about this is we have some actual dual realities there. Yes, Peter was the first leader. Yes, Peter was the first amongst the apostles. It was upon him that the church was built for the first century, upon his ministry and the ministry of the other apostles, of course. So this is really, really important thing for us to understand. But more importantly than that, I think what the church is never just built on a man, is it? Because men fall, people make mistakes. Peter made mistakes. Peter, not long after this, denied Jesus 3 times. So it's never ever built on a person. But what the church is always built on is a confession. What do I mean by confession? Not going and confessing your sins to a priest. Your confession out of your mouth that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God. It's this confession that builds the church. It's this confession that the church is built on from generation to generation to generation for 2,000 years. It has been the confession of one believer after another that you are the Christ, you are the Son of the living God. And this is something that can never be destroyed. This is not the flaws and the failings of one person or one human being, but this is actually just so incredibly important. This is what the church is built on. So I've had a lot of fun with you guys tonight. I had a lot of fun with understanding what the Bible teaches and what we can learn here from Caesarea Philippi. So what are the lessons that we can learn from Caesarea Philippi? That Caesarea Philippi is the source or the place of the blessing. So who is your source? Who is your source? This is so important. Get in your head. Who is your source? Because if you get a revelation that God is the source of all power, all blessing in your life, then suddenly you're not pursuing all the other things. You're not pursuing Tats Lotto tickets. You're not pursuing career opportunities. You're not pursuing men or women. You're not pursuing alcohol or drugs. You're not pursuing fruitless activities, but rather you are pursuing God. And if we pursue God, he adds all things to us. What we need those blessings. So it's the place, it's the source. And the second thing that we learn from today is that even when we live in a hostile world, our confession is always Jesus. Our confession is always Jesus. It doesn't matter what the government says. It doesn't matter what business says. It doesn't matter what big organizations or big corporates say. It doesn't matter what warring factions say about one another. It matters what we say. And even when we're living in a hostile world, and some of us are literally living in persecuted parts of the world, others are just living in hostile parts of the world. But it's important that we always focus on Jesus. So what are those two things? God is the source of our blessing, and Jesus is the confession of our faith, and he is the confession of our heart. So thank you very much. I'm Dr. Brennan Roach, and this is Caesarea Philippi, the place and the source. The source of what? The source of the blessing of God. Thank you very much. Come back next week, and we'll have a look at Tel Dan. You'll love it. You'll enjoy it. And enjoy our lesson today. Come back for some more. Subscribe and enjoy. I'm Dr. Brennan Roach. This is a virtual tour of the Holy Land. The oldest version of the Bible had a little palace where he could stop overnight. Whoever interprets the dream has incredible power. If you're going from Jerusalem to Jericho or vice versa, you stop somewhere here and rest overnight. Near the caves where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found. This is actually a pagan type place. It's a very likely place where Peter preached his first sermon. Some very significant, important events happen at this location.